Welcome everyone to our third edition of the Watershed Stewardship webinar series and this week we are going to be learning all about plants with our lovely presenter, Tori. So I want to welcome you. My name is Ashley Smithers. I am with Clark Conservation District. We are hosting this webinar series, and you can, if you have missed some of our other webinars, you can find all of those online at our website, and that's clarkcd.org. We also have a couple more webinars coming up. We have 2 more coming up in the next 2 weeks. And so if you haven't already, please go and sign up for those. If you are watching this online, those will all be recorded and they'll be available on our website, clarkcd.org/watershed stewards, and you can watch those via our YouTube channel. So make sure at the end of this to fill out the survey. It should pop up. If it doesn't pop up, it is on our website, the survey. And by filling out the survey this week, I have this lovely guide to, it's called Garden Wise, Non-Invasive Plants for Your Garden. It's this lovely book of all sorts of cool plants. So by filling out the survey, you get entered to win that. And if you have filled out the past week's surveys, I should be getting in touch with you soon to let you know if you've won that. So, and also if you watch the recording of this, fill out that survey. It helps us know that you've watched it. And if you fill out a survey for all 5 of the presentations, then you become an official Watershed Steward. So with that, I am going to turn tonight's presentation over to Tori. She does a great job. I love her presenting, and she is an abundance of knowledge on plants. So ask all the plant questions.
Yes, ask all the plant questions.
Thanks,
and
Tori.
Please know that Ashley's going to kind of field questions for me because I was a bad presenter and I didn't do a good enough job of trying to figure out how to make the Q&A box show up so that only I can see it and not you guys. So she might bump in here from time to time when there's a question that I need to answer. And then at another point of the presentation tonight, I'll turn on the chat box so that you can answer some questions that I have. So anyways, let's get started. So how to know the native invasive plants of our forests, wetlands, and open spaces. So just a little bit of background about me before we get started. My name is Tori Hebert. I'm a CPH, or Certified Professional Horticulturist. I've been an educator for 26 years. I've been a gardener for 25. My background is in, or my degree is in elementary ed. And then from there, I kind of, did a bunch of other stuff, garden consulting and coaching, composting, recycling education, some nursery growing and sales. And currently, I'm working at Fort Vancouver High School. I'm their horticulture teacher. I've taught natural resource conservation at that school as well, but right now I'm just teaching horticulture and advanced horticulture, which you can imagine is very interesting during this time, or it was interesting at the end of the year there. I'm also the vice president of the Dorothea chapter of the Washington Native Plant Society. So if you don't know much about that, I'm going to talk more about that later so that you can find out more about WNPS and our presence here and some of the things that you can get involved in. So a little overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So we're going to talk just a little bit about sense of place, which I know if you guys have been in the Watershed Stewards program, you've already been talking a little bit about your watershed, where you're located in our bioregion. Sorry about that, trigger finger. Invasive plants definition, how to identify and control them. We're going to do a little activity with some botany, which normally we do in person, but I've tried to make it work for this webinar version. I hope that it helps you guys and will allow you to at least try your hand at identifying native plants. And then again, just kind of learning how to look and identify in some ways that you can get started in doing that. Okay, Ashley, I'm ready for the poll now. So I'm curious what people's level of experience in identifying native plants are.
So that poll should be up now. And, you know, again, if you have a tablet device, you might need to kind of pump that around. So,
So what is your experience level with identifying native plants? Either you're not able to identify any native plants, you can identify a few, you can identify many native plants, or you can identify most native plants, and if you can't figure it out, you know how to go figure it out.
okay, Tori, it looks like most people have voted.
Okay. So do I close? Oh, there we go. All right. All right. So we've got, most people are able to identify a few plants. 61% of you. Awesome. We've got a couple of experts out there, it looks like, and some people that are brand new, which is awesome. Or 1%, that's good. 6%. Okay, great. That helps me. Thank you. So if you guys have been a part of this series, or if you've just been watching some of the webinars here and there, hopefully you're learning about the benefits of our forests, our wetlands, our open spaces, and of course, you know, amongst many other things that are going on in our world right now, kind of something that's on the back burner, but not really on the back burner, is climate change. And I want to talk just a little bit about creating resilient environments, because I think that native invasive plants have so much to do with this. So I just want you to keep in mind, as we're going through this information, that you know, actions that are going to create climate change resilience in our ecosystems in this area are leaving soils and intact native vegetation undisturbed. So one of the best things that you can do is just to not disturb things in the first place. So if that's a possibility, you know, for maybe whatever you might be working on, let's say you've purchased a piece of land or whatever, and there's some native plants there. If you cannot disturb what's there, that's going to be obviously the first and foremost. As soon as things become disturbed, we invite those invasive plants in, which we'll be talking about in a second. Managing forests, so manage them for density, for health, increasing biodiversity by planting natives and a variety of natives, creating the conditions for the natives to grow that would naturally grow there, and then removing and controlling invasives, which is what we're going to talk about next. All right, so let's talk a little bit about invasive plants. What are they and how did they get here? So invasive plant defined, I got this from the NRCS website, a plant that is both non-native and able to establish on many sites, grow quickly, and spread to the point of disrupting plant communities or ecosystem. Other terms that are used interchangeably for invasive plants, although really if you technically look up the definition, they mean different things. Introduced, weed, non-native, exotics. Those are all you know, words that you hear kind of thrown around, but they really kind of each have their own definition. We're mostly concerned with the non-native that is able to establish on sites. You know them, you know, ivy, of course, is a famous one. So invasives are a real growing threat in our area, in all areas, really because of our modern mobile global society. So there's lots of different ways that they get to us, get to our ecosystems and start disrupting. One way that maybe we don't often think about is that if you're a gardener, sometimes you plant them. So there are plants that I have used in my garden throughout my 25 years or so gardening that I see growing wild on the side of the road now. So I used to love butterfly bush. I planted it in my garden, back in the late 90s. And now, you can see that that's become kind of an invasive pest for our area. Um, you know, I like to go to nurseries like Cistus in Portland and, buy that kind of crazy looking plant. Well, I think, we have to think about, are we planting the next invasive plant? There's a grass that I really love right now called Stipa tenuissima, or Mexican feather grass. The thing seeds like crazy. I know it's going to be on the noxious plant list here pretty soon because it's pretty nice. So I ripped it out of my yard. Wildflower mixes that we buy. Sometimes if we don't buy wildflower mixes that are for our area, they end up having invasive seeds like bachelor button, which is a really common invasive flower on the east side of the Cascades. They hitch rides on wind, water, birds, shoes, tires, boats, cargo containers, pets, and wildlife. Disturbed lands provide a foothold due to cultivation. We have lots of disturbed lands as we construct and move further and further into the forest. When you look to the east here in Clark County, you can see that people are building higher and higher into the foothills, trying to get that view, trying to get out of town. But as we do that, we're disturbing those lands and starting to cause problems in those areas if we're not careful and mindful about how we're doing that. Let's see here. Okay, so why do we care? Why do we care about invasive plants? One time I was driving with my son, who's 10 years old. I was complaining about some invasive plant I saw on the side of the road. He was like, "Mom, I don't know what the big deal is." He goes, "Weren't all plants invasive at some point? They all had to get here. And really, what's the big deal? Why can't you just basically welcome that plant and say, 'Hey, welcome to the club, join us.'" It's an astute little 10-year-old boy. And on some level, yes, that has happened and that will continue to happen, into the future. But it's the rate at which it's happening right now, and that ecosystems and the animals that rely on those plants can't catch up with what's being displaced. Because it's happening at such a rapid pace. So invasive plants are a big obstacle to promoting healthy ecosystems. They rapidly dominate our natural plant communities, destroy wildlife habitat, reduce plant and animal diversity, and cost millions of dollars to control, and in losses to crops, livestock, and land or crop productivity. This is a picture here in the background of purple loosestrife, which is one of our wetland invaders here in this area. A beautiful garden plant that escaped, gardening and is now growing wild in our wetlands. Here's some other examples of some invasive plant problems. Of course, this one on the left is very, very familiar. Ivy creates a monoculture, basically swallowing everything in its path. You can see there's a few sword ferns trying to stick out of there. But for the most part, it just kind of swallows everything up, or eventually grows tall enough on the trees that it can actually get so heavy it can pull the trees over. And then here on the right, we have reed canary grass, another one of our invasives here in our area who, just has tended to take over wetlands and has caused a lot of problems, crowding out a lot of our native grasses, our native forbs, and other things that we're used to having around here. I see that there is a question. Ashley, do you want to? Because I'm afraid if I click on that crazy screen is going to come up again that we saw earlier.
Problem?
Is there a question?
No.
No? Okay. All right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what is a noxious plant. So we have invasive plants. Oh, come on. Some of them are defined as noxious. So it's a legal definition. It's a plant designated by a federal, state, or county government as injurious to public health, agriculture, recreation, wildlife, or property. So basically, these are ones that are, they're on the radar of the government. And they are asking that citizens control them, or sometimes demanding that they control them. So I've got a lot of links embedded in my presentation. So some of them I'll open, some of them you can kind of look at on your own. The 3 classes of noxious weeds defined. I'm going to try to open this. I'm not really sure what's going to happen. Oops. That's not too bad. You guys can see some of my stuff. But anyways, so Class A noxious weeds are non-native species whose distribution in Washington State is still limited. Class B noxious weeds are non-native species whose distribution is limited to portions of Washington State. And Class C are noxious weeds that are widespread and are of special interest to the agriculture industry. So you can open any of these up and you know, look at those species that are listed in these different areas that might end up being, you know, possibly a problem in your, oops, sorry folks. Okay, so also, if you did not know this, noxious weeds do carry fines with them sometimes. So there are certain noxious weeds, and again, if you follow that link, you can pull that open and look at noxious weeds and the fines that are associated with them. Sometimes they're pretty steep depending on the county and the level of problem that that weed is causing in our area. So like we have tansy ragwort in our area, which can be fined. Most often though, weed boards in our area, like the Clark County Weed Board. Now, if you had tansy ragwort on your property and you were not dealing with it, and you know, neighbors were calling and they had, you know, contacted you and you weren't dealing with it, then they might fine you. But most of the time they are there to help you and they want to help you control it. So if you know, if you're calling them and asking for help, you know, how should I control this? Then they're really wonderful in helping that. Oh, I did make that side. There we go. Okay, here's the schedule of monetary penalties. So Class A noxious weed, first offense, 750. So you can see it's pretty steep. But like I said, they're really not out there to be super punitive. They really want to help people, you know, control these invasive plants. It's in their interest that they don't get out of control and that they don't cause, you know, loss of productivity and cropland and stuff like that. Here's some pictures of some invasive plants. We definitely have Japanese knotweed in our area. This one likes to grow alongside of our rivers and our streams. It will, you know, break off in like a big storm surge where the water is really high, little root pieces travel downstream, and then the next thing you know, it's grown downstream as well. Hound's tongue is another one. You might know this by little burrs that kind of attached to clothes. And then this beast over here on the far right, Chinese tree of heaven, that's a real naughty one. This one we have growing in cracks and crevices. I just saw a bunch of them on the side of the St. John's entry onto the East 500 ramp. So yeah, so I definitely know that there's, let's see some questions or some people. Oh, Ashley's posting all kinds of great things over there on the side. Thank you, Ashley. So noxious weeds that harm Washington booklet. I'm not sure if you guys got that from Ashley or not. I know that when we were reading in class, people were getting that. But that's something that you can, I mean, you can request it from the weed board. They'll mail it to you. Look for plants that are overly aggressive or spread too easily by seed or vegetative parts. So oftentimes if you're, you know, you're driving around and you see something that looks like it's taken over, it might be a noxious weed. You know, take note of it, use some of the things that you're going to learn today to try to identify it so that you can, you know, let somebody know about that and we can, you know, start to get that taken care of. So there is the Washington State Noxious Weed Board monitor list and identification tool. This is another link that I've embedded in here. Basically, you can go into this link and you can open it up and you can put in like the color, you know, and different characteristics of the plant, and it'll like, you know, kind of spit out a couple that it could possibly be, and then you can choose from that and decide. And then once you have that information of what you think it is, then I'll give you in a second some place that you can put that information and be kind of a good, you know, citizen scientist and add that information into people's minds that can help us do something about it. Clark County noxious weed list. So this is, every noxious weed list is kind of specific to the county or the part of the state. So if you're interested in finding more about which ones in our area are class A, B, or C, then you'll definitely want to go to this link and look up what's happening in Clark County. And some ones that are especially problematic for us. Okay, what can you do to control invasives? So I've embedded a YouTube video made by Clark County Weed Management, and they have some good ideas in there of things that you can do to control invasive weeds that you might have on your property, or maybe nearby your property, or maybe you're helping out a neighbor or somebody control them. And so that's a really good video to watch. We're not going to watch it here today just because of time. Here's their phone number. Here's their email. This is a really great page, this Weed 'em and Reap webpage for control and disposal. So you can look up by invasive or noxious weed, and they will give you ideas of how to control and dispose it. And then this is the one that I was mentioning before about the Washington Invasive Species Council webpage and phone app to report sightings. So this is something you can download on your phone, and then when you're out and about and you see an invasive weed or a noxious plant, you can go on the app and actually, do like a geolocate pin so that they know that there's, a population of that plant there. And then if it's, on like Washington DOT land or whatever, then they'll take care of it. So that's kind of a nice thing to have in your back pocket to know as well. Okay, let me see here. I just want to check real quick to make sure. So other hacks for controlling invasive plants is basically, like we talked about earlier, just don't disturb the soil and uncover weed seeds. Like a famous one in our area for this is Scotch broom. Scotch broom has seeds that can last in the soil for like 100 years. So if they're in the soil and you're not uncovering the soil or rototilling it up or doing something to expose those seeds, they can kind of stay locked under there. But as soon as we expose those, then we're going to come up with, those seeds. So not disturbing native soil when possible. So even if like Scotch broom has been present on that site and you kill the Scotch broom and pull it out, the seeds from years and years have accumulated there. Hopefully they've been, covered over by leaves and, Douglas fir needles or whatever, but disturbing that soil is going to, cause them to emerge again. Keep cutting the weed to weaken plant reserves. So I've used this one a lot with blackberries. If you keep cutting them, bindweed is another one I've had to do this with. Don't allow the plant to photosynthesize. So that can be a really effective tool, not allowing that plant to get any energy so that it can't photosynthesize and, grow roots and that other type of thing. So keep cutting it. And then sometimes after you've, cut it for a while, then it's easier to dig out. It's, easier to get it out by the roots. I love sheet mulching or deep mulching with wood chips. That seems to be really effective with a lot of different invasives. So getting as much of it as you can, pulling it out, whatever, and then covering it over with, pieces of cardboard and then really deep layers of mulch. That can be a really effective way of at least weakening the plant so it's super easy to pull out. Solarization is another kind of interesting thing. I've used this with bindweed again. It seems like I'm always cursed with places in my life that have bindweed. Laying down a black or clear plastic would be even better, where it can, the sun can get in there and it just basically cooks the soil and that plant. And it might have to take, a couple years, of that before you can get it. And then of course, there's homemade weed killer. There's obviously, chemical weed killers. And sometimes, in certain situations, I know DOT, and people who are managing large pieces of land, sometimes they choose to use that. But if this is for your own yard, and you want to avoid chemicals, then there's a really great homemade weed killer. You can find it online just by looking it up. It's just vinegar, soap, and salt. got to be careful with the salt because it can build up in your soil. I've actually just used straight vinegar, especially if you can buy that 30% stuff. They got it right now at Home Depot right now because they use it for cleaning and stuff like that. But that stuff will kill. Now, it may not kill the root, but it will kill the top of the plant and it will weaken it and get it to the point where you can, pull that thing out. I've used a flame torch before. That's really fun, although you have to make sure that we're not anywhere near the dry season for that. Works really well. Sidewalk cracks, gravel driveways, places where, it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of flame. Of course, if you're doing this right in the middle of, a grassy field that you just mowed or something like that, that might be sort of dangerous. Crowd them out or shade them. So basically the idea here is get rid of the conditions that cause that invasive weed to show up. So for instance, you got a stream. Right next to it is reed canary grass growing, like that picture that I showed a little while ago. Well, why is that reed canary grass there? Because there's no shade. Reed canary grass wants the sun. So if you were to do what most of our streams in our area should be, which is lined with Doug firs and alders and red twig dogwoods and other things that shade that riparian area, then essentially you're going to shade out those things that shouldn't be growing there. So that is one strategy. Crowding them out, so getting native plants in there. Sometimes then the other plants can't quite compete with that. So those are things you can try. Another thing that's kind of an interesting thought is, what are your weeds telling you? We'll talk more about that on the next slide, but I always think that my graphics, I think I'm funny, I guess, but these graphics kind of crack me up. So with native plants, invasive plants, you've got to outwit, outplay, and outlast them. Especially if you don't want to use harsh chemicals, right? You've got to think about what their life cycle is like and when can you get them, like blackberries, cut them down early in the summer when that foliage starts to come back in the fall. Then, that's when you get them, and stuff. So just how can you kind of outlast them and beat them? And may the odds be ever in your favor, because we all know that controlling invasives can be really, really difficult.
Tori, I have a question. Are you ready?
All right. I'm ready.
So the question is, so would it be better to keep cutting weeds than actually try and pull them out, since that disturbs the soil? I have a large property and some other techniques are not feasible on a large scale.
Yeah. Yeah. Like digging out on a large scale is just right. I think that what I would say is go to that Weed 'em and Reap weed board link that I connected a while back, and look up your specific invasive that you're dealing with and find out what their control methods are. So they'll go from everything from the chemical you would use to the mechanical method, so are you going to pull it, or sometimes, like for instance, reed canary grass shows some effect of being controlled with being cultivated, so rototill, for a couple of successive years. So I think it kind of matters what exactly weed we're talking about with you, what invasive. But yeah, so again, it's hard for me to answer without knowing what the particular weed is. But go to that website, look up your invasive, and then kind of go from there. Is there any other questions?
No, and I'll just add that Clark Conservation District also provides technical assistance, as Tori is learning. And so we can also come out and provide a site visit. So contact us if you're interested in that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Another kind of interesting thought is there is a permaculture principle, if any of you are ever kind of dabble in permaculture, that talks about basically what your weeds are telling you about your soil. So this is not necessarily like, blackberries. Blackberries are telling you that you've got lots of sun. That's what blackberries are telling you. So if you don't want blackberries, plant some Doug firs that are going to shade them out, that type of thing, or pull them out by root. But, other weeds can show up because, maybe your soil's compacted. So then long tap-rooted weeds show up. Overly cultivated loose fine soil, shallow rooted ones, oh my gosh, the name of it just went out of my head. Purslane, shows up on really overly cultivated loose fine soil. Overworked soil, like construction sites, they tend to grow nitrogen fixing plants, first type of succession. So like clovers and stuff like that might show up. And then nutrient deficiencies, sometimes, weeds show up to correct those. And if you correct that deficiency, then you can correct your problem. So that's kind of an interesting way to look at it too, a little bit of a different method. Okay, so that is what I'm going to share right now about invasives and noxious weeds. And I'm going to move on to talking about natives, unless anybody has any burning questions that they want to ask.
I have 2 more questions if you're ready.
Yep.
We are overrun in our woods with shiny geranium, acres and acres, neighbors and neighbors. So polling, question mark? I'm guessing that they're just asking like shiny geranium, best what you think. That's a tough one.
That is not a plant that I am familiar with, unfortunately. I've heard of it. I know that it's a problem, but I don't have the answer for that. So again, I would send you to that link, the Weedham and Reap board. I know that it's on there. I've seen it on there. So I would just go back to that and look at what are the, because basically what they've done in that Weedham and Reap, or the Weed Council, is, I mean, they're doing like, they have universities that are doing studies on, how do you control this stuff? What's the best method? They've tested. And so they'll give you, how to control it, and then how to get rid of it so that you're not spreading it, to other places as well.
I will say that I've done a little bit of control around that, and I think that definitely contacting the county weed board would be good. But it is really tough. I have sprayed it. I have had, we've done manual removal with like virtually no success, like year after year after year. We've tried doing where you just put like shading it out by putting down like tarps and plastic, and it's just really hard because of those seeds lasting forever. So yeah. That's not a hopeful answer.
Outwit, outplay, outlast.
Yeah.
Somebody will figure out something.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there any other questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about native plants. Let's get to the good guys here, the ones that we want to know, that we want to invite into our areas, and that we want to know about our place that we live in, our beautiful place. So native plant definition, again, this is from the NRCS, a plant that is a part of the balance of nature that has developed over hundreds or thousands of years in a particular region or ecosystem. Note the word native should always be used with a geographic qualifier, that is native to New England, for example. Only plants found in this country before European settlement are considered to be native to the United States. So again, kind of going back to like what we talked about earlier, sometimes I run into this a lot. I'll be looking online for a native seed source, and you get all these websites and people who have native wildflower mixes, native grass mixes. Well, where is that plant native to? This is a really, really important thing, because our region has specific, plants, grasses, shrubs, trees that are relative to the animals, the pollinators, that they co-evolved together over hundreds and thousands of years, and they need each other, right? And because we're rapidly changing things, we have to, try to plant those things back. I'm going to give you kind of a resource list at the end, but one of the best things that I know of that I'll just kind of mention right now is something called the Portland Plant List. So I have a link to that, and we'll talk more about that here in a little bit, but that's a really good one for our region. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do you know native plants? I mean, some people, it looks like in our group, we've got a lot of people who, already are pretty well versed on this. But for people who are just starting out, how do you figure this out? So, I've got some pictures here. Obviously there's guides, there's books out there. Flora of the Pacific Northwest is our kind of the Bible of our area. Dichotomist's key for keying out native plants. It's pretty high botany, high botanical knowledge. So if you don't know botanical terms and that type of thing, it's going to be a really difficult book for you to navigate. But if you like that type of thing, it's really fun. And then there's all kinds of other more easy to use field guides. One of my favorites is this Wildflowers of the Pacific Northwest, because it's organized by flower color and flower type, and it makes it very, very easy for you to locate things. But, you know, going out with people, taking pictures, going out on hikes. So WNPS does plant hikes. Well, we did do plant hikes, and we plan on doing plant hikes again. And I also know that they are offering some online stuff where people are going out by themselves, videotaping the hike and the plants that they're identifying along the way. So you can use those things as resources now during COVID. Okay, this is a picture of me that I accidentally caught on my wildlife camera. This is me looking at plants, which is what I love to do. It's my favorite thing. So learning to look, I think, is a really, really important thing about identifying plants, whether they be native or invasive. Just learning to recognize and identify. Come on, my thing is so sensitive. And part of that really revolves around noticing characteristics. So what are the characteristics that are key identifying features of the plants that we're trying to know? So I've got these 3 pictures up here on the screen. I am going to, oops, oh, sorry, I did not mean to do that. Hold on a second here. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, there we go. So I've got 3 pictures up here. This is an iconic Pacific Northwest plant. Now let me see if I can go through again or not. So let's see if I can move my chat box. Can you guys see that chat box?
What are you trying to do, Tori?
Well, I just am wondering, can they see the chat box that I have open? Or is that
but they can put stuff into the chat box.
Yes, that's what I want them to do. Okay, so this is our Douglas fir, okay, Pseudotsuga menziesii, Mazicii or Mazicae, people say it differently. And to me, this is iconic, right? As soon as I see this, what we call a habit or how the plant grows here on the right, you recognize, oh, I know that plant. That's our tree, right? That's like the Pacific Northwest tree. People have it tattooed all over their bodies in the Pacific Northwest. And it has some, you know, key identifying characteristics. So look at these pictures here, and in the chat box, if anybody wants to just offer up, if you feel comfortable, what are some other things that you see in these pictures that are key identifying features of Douglas fir? Things that you can look at and say, yeah, this helps me to know that that is a Douglas fir.
Tori, do you want me to read them to you?
Actually, I can see them. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, though. Yeah, I love it. The cones, mouse running under the table. I love it. So yeah, so we've got, if you look right here on the cone picture, so this looks like a little mouse butt with his tail, you know, running under the table. So this is a extremely distinct. This doesn't happen on any other conifer in our area. When you see that, you know that you're looking at a Douglas fir cone. Now, the problem is that sometimes there might not be cones on the tree, or they might be too tall. So I see some other things: deep grooves on the bark, length and shape of needles, shape of cones, branches curve up. You guys can see that here. And another thing that's interesting about our Doug fir too, when you look at it from far away, is that it has really irregular branching, right? It's not like a perfect cone. or something like that, it has kind of those irregular branches that stick out in different directions. And that really rough, deep bark, which of course is home to so many of our native wildlife and has all kinds of benefits for wildlife. So that's good. Another thing too is that with Douglas fir, the needles are all sticking out away from the branches and wrapped all the way around. So that's another way that you can identify it. But the cone for sure is a dead giveaway. And so that kind of leads us to, one thing about identifying plants, which is that, that flowers and fruit are like the highest identifying feature that you can get in a when you're looking at a plant. So that's why I really like that Wildflowers book by Mark Turner, because if you can find a flower, then you can absolutely positively ID that plant, because it's kind of like a snowflake. There's no two on the planet that are exactly alike. All right, so I know that I actually went too far here and showed the name of that, but maybe you guys didn't see it. So this is a native wildflower that we have in our area. I just saw some growing about 3 weeks ago. They were in full bloom on the side of Highway 14, just after the Evergreen Boulevard exit on the north side. And it was just, blue. It was beautiful. So, so in the chat box, would you guys mind just, again, look at this plant? What are some things that right away you would begin to notice and to look at to help you to be able to identify this plant? Anybody feel comfortable to put it in the chat box? There we go. Okay, on sandy, dry soil. Ooh, that's good. So yes, so looking at the ecology of where the plant is, is it growing on a riverbank? Is it in a forest? This one's growing on just sandy, dry soil. Love it. Color, round shape of flower. Okay, rounded lavender flower. Yep. Anybody have any guesses as to whether this is what type of plant this is? Is it a tree, shrub, perennial, vine? Leaf shape. Perennial. Okay. So yeah, you guys are you're hitting the nail on the head here for leaf shape. Leaf shape is another key identifying feature. After flowers and fruit, if you can tell a leaf shape, that can really help you to identify. So you guys are saying probably a perennial. There's really not any huge way to know that by looking at it. Sometimes if it's like a large stand, it's got maybe it's rhizotomaceous and it has like plants coming up from underground things that are growing, that might lead you to be that it's a perennial. But the main thing is that you just kind of have to know what type it is. So is it a tree, is it a shrub, is it a vine? This is actually an annual. One way that you could guess that is if you saw like little baby ones off to the side, little immature ones. That might help you to know. But just knowing that it's not, knowing what a tree is, what a shrub is, what deciduous is, what evergreen is, all of those things are going to be things that you're going to use to help identify. So this is, globe gilia. That's the common name, Gilia capitata, one of our lovely native annuals. Okay, here's a pretty common in our forests and woodlands here. We've got a flower and a branch. Anything that you guys would notice looking at this that would kind of begin to help you to demystify and unlock the mystery of what this plant is? You can write that in the chat box for me. Don't be afraid to be wrong. Just throw anything out there. Red looking branches opposing leaves. Yep, good. Okay, and we've got flowers, right? So flowers are very helpful. I think, oh, I see that thorn there. I think that might be from a different plant, but on this one, serration or lack of on the leaves. Okay, so somebody here who knows their leaf shapes and leaf margins. So if you guys look at this leaf, okay, so opposing means that there's a leaf right across from each other, right? There's also alternate leaves where there would be a leaf here, and then a leaf there, and then a leaf here, and then a leaf on the other side. So this is called an opposite. This is a good way for you to begin to identify something. Leaf margin refers to this edge right here. Is it serrated? When it's not, and it's smooth like this, it's called entire. There's, you know, a bunch of stuff online you can look up to help you to describe, okay, what's this shape? You know, probably ovate maybe, with a margin that's entire. And so you can start to plug those things into the internet and hopefully come up with, you know, the plant that you're looking at. Another thing that you can tell by looking at a plant is whether it's, you know, deciduous or evergreen. So evergreen tends to be either have needles or scales, or it might be shiny if it's a broadleaf like this. So all of those things can happen. I'm going to add one more picture. Does that help give the mystery away of what this plant is? Anybody know this one? Those white berries right there, the dead giveaway. That's right, snowberry. Okay, so this is our native snowberry, or Symphoricarpos albus. So again, flowers and fruit, key identifying features, and then you kind of start to go to the leaves, and then, you know, if it's a tree, you can go into bark and that type of thing. So let's just, you know, ask these questions here real quick. Did anybody have any trouble describing a part of a plant for lack of a word to describe what you were observing? Like maybe you didn't know what to call that thing that you saw on the plant. Anybody experience that? You can write in the chat. Okay. What parts of plants are hard to describe? Ooh, how waterproof the leaf is. I love that. Yeah. What parts of plants are hard to describe? Maybe we don't have the right, you know, vocabulary or whatever to describe them the way that, you know, or know what we're seeing. So we had somebody who knew that the leaves were opposite. But if you didn't have that vocabulary to know that, or to know that a leaf is, you know, glaucous, which is, you know, when it has kind of that bluish cast to it, right? There's a whole language to identifying plants, botanical terms that can, you know, start to really help you out. So one of the main ways that I identify plants is I take pictures if I'm out on a hike. I take, you know, several pictures, and then I come home and then I just start plugging in my key identifying features into the internet. And I start looking at images, and then I start just kind of deducing from looking at the images. If I don't get anything that looks like what I'm looking at, you know, then I go back and I try again. So that's really, you know, a way to do it if you don't have field guides. Now, if you have field guides, then obviously you can use that. But sometimes it helps to have botanical language in your back pocket. So I've got a couple links here: glossary of botanical terms on Wikipedia. There's a botany dictionary app that you can use offline. And then I really love this book right here, Plant Identification Terminology and Illustrated Glossary. That's a really good one. It's got pictures. I like pictures. Another thing that can help, you know, as you kind of learn to look and identify, here is a bunch of my favorite books and websites for identifying plants. So Plants of the Pacific Northwest by Pojar and McKinnon. I've got a picture of that in a second. Famous Pacific Northwest book. That really is just, you know, so key for our area, especially if you're on the coast or on the west side of the Cascades. Watershed Alliance has some native plant cards that are really helpful. If you've got a Western garden book, you're a gardener, that's going to be a really helpful one. I'm sorry, it's so dark in my area. It seems like the sun has gone down over here, so I'm losing light. Gresham High School, the teacher there has got this crazy, amazing website. And he just has so many pictures of plants, and he has it really well organized. It's a great website. I use that a lot. Washington Native Plant Society has an amazing plant directory. Again, kind of like the noxious weed one, where you can kind of plant, push in some of your things, some of the characteristics, and it'll pull up a possible, plant match for you. Here's a Pacific Northwest wildflowers one. OSU landscape plants is great. I use that one a lot as well. And a lot of times these are the images that are coming up when you're searching through images. And then when you go to click on the one that you think it is, you might get pulled to one of these great places. USDA plant database, that's another one. And then Portland plant list. So I know those of you who are in the Watershed class, Stewards class, you've got a link to that. But if you just Google Portland plant list, that is probably one of the best resources in our area. It organizes plants by ecosystem. So if you have like a dry slope, what plants grow there, what plants should be there. If you have, a wet meadow, I mean, it just gives you all of the different places and has lots of different ways for you to access the information. So this question, would it be helpful to have another way to identify plants other than searching online or through a field guide? So there are things called dichotomous keys. There's some that are online. There's this kind of easy one. I've used this with my students before. It's through Oregon State, and you do it with trees. So basically a dichotomous key, if you're not familiar with them, is it asks you a question, is it evergreen, is it deciduous? You say evergreen, it takes you to the next question about evergreens. Does it have needles or scales? It has needles. Okay, are the needles this long? Are they, this color, blah, blah, blah. So it kind of helps you, break it down, and then eventually they'll say, okay, this should be your plant based on all the questions that you answered. So those are kind of fun. The floor of the Pacific Northwest is for, I would say, really advanced people, or people who really like fine details. You really have to know a lot of botanical knowledge to use it. But this is what the bigwigs use when they're out in the field and they really have to identify something down to the exact species. It's fun to have. I have one. I don't use it all the time. I do have it. How much time do we got left here, Miss Ashley? Am I needing to
6 minutes.
How many? 6 minutes?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So another thing that I would really highly recommend is to start to learn patterns of plants. So there's 8 major plant families around the world, not including shrubs and trees. They are the mint, parsley, mustard, pea, lily, grass, rose, and I can't see my last thing that I wrote. I don't have it memorized. Okay. And aster, that's right, the aster family, which contains like sunflowers and daisies and all those other things. So this is a great website. This guy wrote a book, and he's now got all this information online about how to learn to identify those plant families. So I kind of discovered this inadvertently. I guess it's just sort of naturally how my brain works through gardening in my own yard for so long. And then I took an ethnobotanical class where we would go out into the forest and different ecosystems, and we had that POJAR book. And the POJAR book is organized by plant families. And so I started to go, oh my gosh, this looks like, this plant that I have in my garden. It has some of these same features. And so that was how I really started to get into plant identification, was by beginning to recognize those patterns that exist across plant families. Like for instance, the mint family, right? A lot of those have square stems, they have strong smells. So that's one way. Here's another one that's kind of easy to do. This is the rose family. So 5 separate sepals, 5 separate petals, and numerous stamens. So that's kind of the basics of the rose family. So we have our native thimbleberry, our native salmonberry, and our native rose, Nootka. So you can see that they all have that distinguishing characteristic. And then here's kind of a little oddball that you wouldn't necessarily think was in the rose family. But if you look at the flower, it has the same type of pattern. And this is slender cinquefoil Cotentilla gracilis, which is also in the rose family. So it's just one of those things that once you start to recognize and learn those patterns, it can really help you to identify plants. So here is this is nicknamed the POJAR because that's one of the authors. Plants of the Pacific Northwest by Kojar and McKinnon. This one is organized by plant family. This one's organized by color and flower type. So these are the two that I would recommend for anybody who's just getting started, or for those of you guys who you don't feel super confident. I think that they'll take you, about as far as you want to go before you get really serious and go buy that flora of the Pacific Northwest and start doing dichotomous key type work. For identification using the internet, which I said before, this is mainly how I use it. I mean, I use my books when I'm out in the field, but because I like to take lots of pictures when I come home, I just look at my pictures and start using field guides or start using the internet, unless it's just really, really obvious in the field guide. So Washington Native Plant Society, Flora and Fauna Northwest, and then these other ones that I listed. Oh, there's the Portland plant list link. I knew that I'd linked that somewhere. Okay, learning from others. This is another really just highly recommended way. I know right now we're kind of got our hands tied with this, but the iNaturalist app, I can't say enough about that. Get yourself an account, download the app and get yourself an account. There's just the people on there are they're brilliant, right? And so anything that you put on there, they're going to be able to help you get an identification on that. But I still really encourage you to learn to look and identify yourself. I think it's really important for you to develop those skills of seeing those key characteristics and stuff. Suxdorfia, that's our local chapter of the Washington Native Plant Society. So go online, sign up for the newsletter and stuff like that, so that you have information for when events are happening. And then WNPS has events online right now and has a lot of really amazing events when they're hopefully back to normal someday. Portland plant list. So again, I kind of mentioned that. Some of you guys may have heard about the Backyard Habitat Certification Program here in Clark County. That's a really great resource and a way that you can learn more about how to get native plants in your own yard and create habitat in your own yard. I really highly recommend that. Here's the WNPS website link. And if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat now, and I'll happy to answer as many as I can before we're done here.
Yeah, so it's 8 o'clock, so we will go ahead and wrap this up, but feel free to type any of those questions in there. And Tori, is it okay we can stick around for a little bit and answer some of those questions?
Yeah,
but I do want to be mindful of your time and the allotted hour. So if you need to get going, thank you so much for joining us. As you guys all leave, there will be a survey that should pop up. If it doesn't pop up, that is on our website where you probably registered as well. And so make sure to check that out. If you watch this as a recording, then just go to our website and fill out that survey link. I wanted to mention that Clark Conservation District does have a native plant sale every year. Hoping it should happen. We'll figure it out. So that usually happens every February. And I'm going to start ordering for that soon. So if you guys are interested in native plants, I do have on our website a form to fill out to request plants, because like I said, I'm going to be doing that ordering soon. So I just thought I would give that shout out for you all. And also feel free to email either Tori or myself and just ask for these slides because I know that there's a lot of links in them, and I will be putting some of those links in the follow-up email. So with that, I think there's a couple of questions that we can ask. So
the people who need to leave or want to leave can, and then those of you guys who have questions and you want to stick around, then
Ashley. Totally. We'll stick around for a couple more minutes. So Chelsea asked, are there any issues with introducing early succession plants like river lupin, which I've not heard of river lupin in particular, to disturbed riparian areas?
Wow, that sounds like a question for Clark County Bee Management. That's one I don't feel very confident answering. I am familiar with river lupin, and if you've got a disturbed riparian area, I mean, my first feeling is get some shade going. I mean, I think that so my understanding of repairing riparian areas is you want to add shade and you want to add bank stabilization. So snowberry, hardhack spirea, red twig dogwood, those types of things that are going to hold the bank together. And then those are going to shade out other things that are growing that shouldn't. Riverbank lupin are beautiful, and they're gonna provide nitrogen because they're nitrogen fixers that'll feed those shrubs that are growing and stuff. But you really got to get that bank stabilization so that we don't have erosion, and then to get that shade back to the riparian area. Yeah, that would be my
Yeah,
advice.
and I would agree with that. I often do site visits, and so I think, sometimes there's a little bit of a site assessment with it. Depends on kind of what was there before, if there was like a lot of reed canary grass or just like with the site prep. Some people will opt to put down some sort of like quick, like native seed cover, as while your faster growing plants like maybe maples or whatever and alders are growing up, but then you're going to ultimately want to move it along so that you get shading of the stream. So just gonna say, if you want me out to your place, let me know.
Yeah, and that kind of answers Athena Gilbert had a question too here in the chat box. So yeah, there's so many local resources. One of the best ones being the conservation district. So Ashley, Jeff Paulson, who's the forester, they will come out to your property and help you plan and manage. So use that resource because that's just an amazing resource that we have here in the county. And I'm sure there's others as well, depending on kind of like what your use is for your land and stuff like that. But definitely look into all of the resources. And then like the other Janine Felix Ford, I'm wondering if you mentioned a place where we can get free or inexpensive dates of plants that we can plant on property. Okay, so yeah, so as Ashley just mentioned, they have a native plant sale. Clark College has a native plant center. They do native plant sales, so I would get connected with them. And then there's native plant nurseries in our area. I feel kind of like some of the commercial nurseries like Shorty's and Yard and Garden, they try, but a lot of times they don't have really the right stuff, and it's certainly not inexpensive. So you're going to want to be contacting these people who are, bringing in, Chelsea. Hi, Chelsea Packinens. So yeah, Casey Center, that's right. Casey Center has a native plant sale. I'm sure there's some at the Master Gardener plant sale. And then of course, us high school teachers, we all have plant sales in the spring, and I know that I carry native plants as well. So, yeah, so lots of options out there for cheap native plants. And
Naturescape
yeah,
has one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and while we have ours, we're not like in competition. We want to get it out. We're just another resource. So we definitely try to promote through our Facebook page a lot of the different native plant sales. There's also a tree one, a forestry one that usually happens.
Yeah. The nice thing about the Clark Conservation District plant sale though is that you get things in bundles, and they really are. It's first of all easier to pick up because they're in bundles of 10 or whatever, and then they're also a little bit cheaper than people who have potted them up and have grown them for a while. So.
Oh, I didn't realize that others did it by individual.
Yeah, most Clark College Native Plant Center is potted up and grown, and yeah, so you guys are really the only ones that I know that do kind of like that wholesale method. And then probably the forestry sales too.
Cool. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. And as you exit the webinar, you should have the survey pop up Somebody emailed me last week. Apparently that didn't work. I'm so sorry. I checked it. I think it should work this week. If you don't see that survey, just pop right over to our website and it should be there. It's the same survey that you filled out if you've joined us in the past. You'll just put that you saw this week's and then give us the information on that. And it will also be in the follow-up email that you should receive tomorrow. So thank you everyone for joining us. Let's all give Tori a big round of applause. And yep, thank you so much.